Alright guys, so welcome back to part 3 of the R1 build, actually part 2 of Disassembly. The first video was kind of short. I was just trying to get fairings off and let you guys kind of see what it looked like underneath. Didn't really need to show any specifics on that video because that's kind of common sense stuff. But what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be removing the engine, exhaust, and all the components to it so we can get that stuff out of the way to drop that motor out. So this stuff will be a little bit more detailed. I'll show you exactly what you got to do as far as bolts and stuff like I usually do to remove. But the first thing that we're going to do, we're going to be removing the exhaust, and then I'm going to drain the oil in the radiator coolant. Obviously, you don't have to see the radiator coolant and the oil being drained. It's pretty straightforward, but I will show you that. One of the things I do want to do when this bike's off, and we'll get into later on, is remove the AIS, which is the air injection system. Right now, I actually figured out that is what this little random block off is. So from what I can hear, we can basically tap this right here and plug them things, and we won't need to have this big old hunky thing away or in the way of our exhaust. So anyways, let me do this. Let me go ahead and drain the oil and the coolant, and then I will pull off the exhaust in that order, and then we'll start moving forward. Alright guys, so the coolant is drained out. I drained it from the lowest point, which is the radiator hose that runs down the left-hand side, down to the base of the motor. What I'm going to have to do now is disconnect the wiring harness here. You'll see that there is a 10mm bolt here that comes out. We have to disconnect the line here that goes to the thermostat and all our extra runoff lines, basically up here, down there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to disconnect the radiator fan, and we are going to pull this thing, basically drop it down and pull it straight back towards where I'm at right now, and that thing should slide right out. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Alright, so that radiator is out. I almost forgot the one main bolt, the lower bolt, is in every single bike's radiator. I almost forgot to take out, then I realized it's just a 10mm bolt, pulled it out. So the whole thing's completely gone, and I'm going to tell you, the coolant, man, it is nasty. You see how dark it is? You can't really tell on camera. On camera, it actually looks like green coolant, but it actually is like a really dark, pale green. It doesn't look good, and the oil wasn't much better. So this is indicative of, in my opinion, and throughout the years I've been doing this, of older bikes, because people just kind of lose interest in them, and they kind of get pushed to the side. And hey, if they run great, they run. If they don't, they don't. It'll be stuck in the garage, and we don't care. So that's kind of indicative, like I said, of what I've seen in these bikes that are, you know, over 20 years old or close to. So anyways, that's off. What we're going to do now, we're going to get this exhaust off. So we need to move forward here. You'll see the X-up system is still wired in to the motor, and if you can see here, there are, it's kind of tough to see, there's two 8mm bolts back there to pull this motor off. You can't get to them with the frame there though, so I'm going to try to go ahead and remove this screw and that screw there to see if I can disconnect the wiring first, because it'll be a lot easier once the exhaust's off and everything's out of my way, especially if we change those rear sets. But we're going to go ahead and take those wires off. Obviously all the head bolts, those pop off. And from what I can tell, there's one mount on this what I believe is a homemade shorty pipe, which is right there, and that's typical of your rear mount for any exhaust. That has to come off as well. We're going to pull those bolts out. We're going to rip that thing off real quick. Alright, so there the exhaust is off. As far as the wires for the X-up system, yeah, I just pulled those two screws off, and they had some adjusters here. I was able to loosen those up, and these came right out of the back of it. Really easy. Again, then taking the bolts off there, and our lower bolt I spoke of, I pulled right off. And these are definitely, or it is definitely a homemade shorty pipe, but you know, you can't have to blame a person for doing it, because all it is really is a $19 Advanced Auto Parts slanted pipe. And then you weld it onto the slip-on and a bracket, where they're charging upwards of well over $100 for one of these things at about any place. So you know, it's just not even a muffler, it's just to keep the flames off the plastic. So I mean, it's pretty basic. One thing I did notice as well after we drained the oil, you'll see our window is still, well, it's still nasty. So we know that it is stained. We will have to clean it the best that we can. So what we're going to do right now, we do have a couple more things to do. Again, I have to pull off all our cables, but we are going to move forward, and we're going to start unbolting some of the fun stuff. We know that we have to pull out our coils, unplug all the electrical in the front. I do need to disconnect the cables going to the intake, or they're pretty much carburetors, but throttle body slash carburetors. If you'll notice, this was the hybrid gear, so rather than having carburetors or fuel injectors sitting in the carbs, they basically fuel injected and stuck the injectors, which you can't really see in the bottom of it, then use basically carbs without the needle to regulate the airflow coming in. So interesting way of doing it, but anyways, that's what's got to come out. We're going to pull all that stuff out. Any extra tubing that's connected down here, we're going to disconnect. We're going to probably label everything and get that ripped out now. As you'll notice, we're still using our handy bagging system to keep track of all our bolts. So let's go ahead and get some of that stuff off so we can move forward to get this thing out. Okay, so we have unplugged everything up front. As you can see, all the harnesses that matter that are connected to the motor. We've disconnected all the coils. Now we could pull the coils out, but it's not really necessary at this point. They're not really in the way from what I can tell. We've disconnected everything I can see back here, with the exception of the hot lead that goes to the starter. It's kind of tough to get to, so I'm just going to reach back there as we lower the engine down a little bit. I believe it's just a 10mm nut, not a big deal. So that said, the next steps to move forward on this to get this motor out, we are going to lay the carpet down on the ground to prevent destroying or the engine dropping on the concrete as best as we can. We're going to get the backs on the stand. We are going to loosen the rear sprocket so we can pull the chain forward and slide the front sprocket out so the engine is free of that. And then we have basically 2 bolts on each side here, and our 2 main bolts are up in our lower here. Once we get these 2 bolts out here, we'll put the jack underneath it, we'll get the top bolt out, and then we'll pull the bottom bolt out and slowly drop this engine down. So let's go ahead and get some of that stuff working. Okay, so we got the safety carpet down. We got the bike up on the rear stand. Now it's time to go ahead and loosen up this back wheel and slide the thing forward so we can get the chain off. What we're going to be doing first is removing this nut right here. Once that nut is loosened, we will be loosening up the tensioning nuts to be able to slide the whole thing forward. Typically, if we were just taking off the chain, all we need to do is slide it forward, pull the chain off the rear sprocket, take off our safety bar right here that stops the chain from coming off and hitting the case, and that thing would slide over top of it. However, because we're doing some transmission work, I don't know if this main shaft will have to come out of the transmission. That said, I don't know if it comes out this way. It might have to go that way. And because of that, the sprocket probably needs to come off just to be safe, and it's a lot easier to take off when we have some traction in the back. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to loosen up the sprocket first here, then I'm going to slide the bolt or the nut off the back of here, loosen the bolt, slide everything forward, get the chain off, and then we'll move forward from there. So as you can see, the front sprocket is now off. Back I don't really need to take off. I guess we just kind of slid it out of the way. And yes, I am glad that I kept the chain on because that sprocket was on there tight. It was very difficult to get off. I had to crank it off. I tried doing it with the bike on the ground, and a long breaker bar didn't work, so I ended up having to use an impact. The impact size is obviously 36mm, and it came off. It just took a minute. So like I said, you want to be careful. It is left hand off, typical left hand off. It does have a metal kind of a washer behind it that folds against it to stop it from turning, so it locks onto the bike. You'll have to hammer that flat with like a flathead screwdriver or some kind of something to get it flat there. But what we're going to do now, as I said before, we are going to take out these 2 front bolts here. Then we're going to take out this top bolt here, leaving just this lower bolt here to be removed. And then at that point, with the jack underneath it, this motor should pivot down. We will slide that bolt out and pull this motor out of underneath it. Not forgetting to obviously disconnect the starter hot wire and anything else that may be connected once we drop this down. So let's go ahead and get that done. Alright guys, I almost forgot a couple things. You want to take a 10mm ratchet and remove your shifter. Because obviously this thing pulling down the weight of your engine, that thing would not survive. Just a 10mm nut, just pull it off, get it out of the way. I went ahead and zip tied it up so when this thing does come down, it doesn't hit it. Also, I did realize that I didn't know was there's a bolt right down here above the kickstand that goes into the motor that has to come out. So I got those out, I got the 2 front ones out, and now we're going to pull the 2 rears out and drop this thing down. Alright, sorry guys, one more delay. I was looking at it and I know that this motor is going to basically flop down this way. Just because of the natural weight of the head and where it's going to pull, and that's going to destroy this lower radiator bracket. And that lower radiator bracket is actually also part of the AIS system. So understanding that I'm removing that, I thought why not go ahead and just pull it off now to have it out of the way. I won't necessarily plug it just yet, but I'm going to remove it so it's out of the way. And by doing that, I'm just taking off 4 clamp screws up there. There's a couple small Allens there. And that thing should pull off the back side there, so let me go ahead and rip that out before I drop this motor. Alright, so not to forget, we do still have to take off that starter motor wire. You can kind of get a better idea where you can see it there now, down in there. I think what I'm going to do though, rather than digging my hands down in there, just leaving it on, I'm going to follow that wire up, and that wire goes right to the solenoid. So I'm just going to pull it off in the solenoid, take off the zip tie right here, which is a reusable zip tie, and just let that come with the motor. So let me go ahead and get that out. Alright guys, now we are basically lowering the motor down. I do want to point something out. I kind of screwed up, and I didn't realize. When this thing was all together, the lower bolt here is actually the swing arm bolt. I thought that was connected to the base of the motor like most every other motorcycle is, like the R6. This one is not. In fact, that lower bolt that we took out earlier was the lower bolt. So try to be careful. You don't want to take out that lower bolt if you don't have to until the very end. That's usually our pivot point. And you definitely don't want to take out that one, so I'm going to have to put that one back in. Like I said, it was tough to see because this was bolted up, well, basically pushed right up to the motor. It looks like it was part of the motor, so I didn't really notice. That was my own fault. Anyhow, what we're doing now is we got that lower bolt out as well, and that one out now as well. We just have to be careful that this frame doesn't try to separate, since I can't really move it with the engine kind of hanging on it right now. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to lower this motor down right now. I'm going to pull it out of there. Everything else, like I said, is disconnected, so we're good to go. I just got to get it low enough to clear it, and then I'll get that bolt back in that swing arm. Let's move forward. Okay guys, so the motor is out. Surprisingly enough, I was able to pick it up. I'm really surprised that that motor is not heavier. It really didn't feel any heavier just by picking it up and kind of bending over and like lifting it off the ground than the R6 did. It really wasn't that heavy. I was really surprised, but you can see, I mean, that thing's still going to need to be deep cleaned before I start ripping it apart. I don't want any grease and dirt to get inside the motor. As far as the chassis itself, or the frame itself, that still has some work to be done. Again, we told you we have to do some of the wheels because they're all chipped up. We have to do the whole different handlebar setup there, color, paint, angle of the clip-ons, all that stuff. So that's all going to change. And then what we'll probably do is we'll probably touch up and spray the frame so it looks a cleaner, more newer satin black like it should be, not all wore out like it looks. So we're going to go ahead and take care of that. We were probably going to have some either new rear sets coming, or if for some reason China's backed up, which they probably are, we might go ahead and do a DIY black anodizing on the originals that we have. So other than that, one last update will be for the bodywork. We had some good ideas out there as far as color schemes and stuff that I really liked. But the bad news to this is I think this might be staying the same. And the reason I say that, I don't know where these plastics were made, China or wherever, but doesn't really make a difference. But when they make these things, what they do is they decal everything and then they clear over top of it. So they'll basically paint the black and the white, and then they'll put green decal on, a yellow decal on, and all the monster graphics were decaled on, and then it's clear coated over top of. Where you run into a problem is when you go to sand this down, you'll get through the clear coat and you'll hit the sticker. Now, that doesn't sound like too big of a deal, but once you hit that sticker, you got goo in there. It's hard to clean, and there's a lot more to sand down to try to get that thing level. Because if you don't do that, you're always going to see, basically as a shadow, the monster emblem and everything else. Now, I wish that would look cool, but it probably isn't going to. So I think what I'm going to have to do is probably stick with the original theme. However, we are making some changes. So I went ahead and ordered a R6 tail section to get rid of the big ugly whatever that is. So that'll be gone. The tank is going to be a whole different paint scheme from what it was because it wasn't the correct styling. In fact, this was meant to look like this picture here. Now, obviously, it's never going to look like that. We'll get as close as we can, but that's just a newer, more exotic-looking bike than an 02. So we are going to be changing some things, but we're going to make the color scheme go the best that we can and make it look a lot better than it did. So that said, that is a wrap for this video, guys. I appreciate you watching. If you found it useful or you liked the video, please throw a thumbs up. If you're not already, please subscribe and hit that bell notification to get instant access to these videos when they pop up. I appreciate you watching. Stick around. We'll see you for the next one.